Welcome to the Avive podcast. I'm your host. My name is JF Benoit. I'm the best-selling author of Addicted to the Monkey Mind and Avive, an adventure in belonging. After 12 years of running a holistic addiction treatment center and decades of helping people who have been challenged with conflicts in their relationships, anxiety, depression, and even addiction, what I saw is that the common denominator of our pain and suffering is based on the lack of true connection with ourselves and with other people. Connection underscores absolutely everything in our lives. Whenever we're experiencing distress, when we're being reactive or experiencing triggers, the root cause is often a disconnection and a break in our ability to experience true belonging. So I bring a wealth of experience and empathy, creating a space where you could feel understood and less alone in your struggles. In this podcast, I want to help you tackle the belief that you need to change yourself in order to fit in. A belief that most of us have adopted in our upbringing that keeps creating a tremendous amount of anxiety in our lives. I want to inspire you and guide you to really shed that mindset. So welcome. I'm glad that you're here. So with connections with guests like you and interviews, I'm going to help you truly and support you to be your true self, to be able to let go of performing, let go of meeting other people's expectation, and most importantly, really gain the ability to shed all the self-judgments that we have about ourselves. And instead, really focusing on the resilient person that you are, on the courageous person that you are, and building this ability to experience yourself as this innate love and value that exists within you. So I'm really glad that you're here. Let's explore this together in another episode of Avive.
Hello, JF. How are you?
Hi, Carrie.
Nice to see you. Yeah,
Same
it's been a
here.
couple weeks.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I have been thinking about a couple things because as we have had the different podcasts, there's a couple of times this has come up, and I wanted to get more into specifics of it and what you really mean by it, because for somebody who's kind of empathetic and maybe has been used to being a little bit undermined or manipulated, I can see where this would bring up a lot. And that's when you talk about how it's not really the other person.
Right.
It's what's going on with you. And I'm like, hell no, sometimes it's the other person. It's them. No, so and
Should we
I
go?
understand.
Should we go to the hair salon?
Sometimes. Yeah. Um, yeah, I need some gossip time. No, I don't even do that. I don't even do that. Okay. But no, I mean, basically, because I think that's an important kind of clarification to get, because there are a lot of times, and almost everybody I know has been through different situations where they have had either a partner or a friend, or where you're really working hard on doing your own stuff. Like you are being introspective, you're thinking about it from the other person's point of view, and then you run up against somebody who is maybe not doing that, or they take advantage of the fact that they know that you do that. And so then they're like, okay, well, no, that wasn't me. What are you talking about? You're the one who has to learn this or that. And of course, when you're always trying to be a better person and you're always trying to be introspective, then you take that time to think, oh, okay, well, maybe that is the case. And so and I know that's not really what you're saying, when you were making those points, but that's what came up within me when I was listening to that, how a lot of people could misunderstand, could not even misunderstand, but have that come up when they're thinking about it, because almost everybody I know who has been kind of taken advantage on in that sort of way. And a lot of times I see in couples where you have one person who really does kind of encompasses the other person, and then you can see the other person's maybe a little pushy, and um, so I just kind of came up with a couple different scenarios that I wanted to talk about, and one's more just like a couple relationship thing, and then another one's more from an emotional level, what people go through. So, are you prepared?
I'm just
Okay.
go, go, go.
Okay. So, let's take for example, I'll say Sarah and Jake. They're in a relationship. Sarah works out of the house. She's in a demanding job, and she comes home, she's stressed out. Jake has a more flexible schedule. He still works, but he works at home, so he figures that he can handle most of the household chores and do that type of labor, taking care of things in the house. Well, Sarah gets home, she's stressed, and she's like, which actually is hilarious because I have so many. This scenario has the guy in the position, but quite often, women, that's one of the things they joke about, the guy coming home and say, "What did you do today?" So I'm turning the tables, and it's a guy this time. Um, but saying that the house wasn't clean enough, and then of course he's like he's always eager to please. So he's internalizing it and thinking, okay, what can I do better? How can I do that? But he feels overwhelmed because that's not easy being at home and being in charge of everything that comes up, let alone if there's kids involved and, you've got the laundry and the cleaning and the delivery man coming up and he's whatever, that happens in a daytime that interrupts pets. Um, so, but when he's frequently taking that kind of blame on himself, and she's okay with letting him do that. So,
Right.
in a situation like this, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, what a beautiful example. I think there's so many of those moments in our lives, Carrie. I mean, I think it's insane. Like, if we
Yeah,
saw a video,
yeah,
a day by day of couples,
yeah, 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 for
and,
sure.
and and they'll be about different things. They'll be about the
Yeah,
kids, they'll be about the work,
yeah,
the job.
yeah.
Here's what I think is so bizarre because after years of just really working with people, for
Hmm.
me, it's obvious now. But I
Yeah,
think for a lot of us, we're so conditioned. I think to unwrap this, let me give you this example. Let's say you come to park your car, right,
yeah,
in a big parking lot, and you have
yeah,
your blinker on, and somebody's about to pull out of the parking space, and
yeah,
somebody comes from the other side and takes the parking space, right?
yeah. Son of
And
a.
then, right? And so if we look at an example like that, we say to
Yeah.
ourselves, well, of course we're right. Yeah. And so
Mm.
the whole tendency mentally, if we get hooked by our thoughts, right? It's like what you just said. Your reaction is a thought that says, hey, that son of a gun took my space. I was there
Yeah,
first. I had my blinker on,
yeah.
Okay. So in relationships, it's no different. So it's the same principle of I see my perspective, first of
Hmm.
all,
Hmm.
and it's even harder when I believe that my perspective is the right one.
Which
Because,
almost always happens. I mean, most people think their perspective is the right one, you know? They don't think, "Oh, this is wrong." Well, they could, I guess, but usually people are pretty sure their perspective is the one.
right. But you're right. I mean, that's what
Yeah.
happens for most of us. We
Yeah.
are hooked by our perception and we hold on to it like dear life,
Yeah.
and then that's where we get stuck, right?
Yeah.
But in a experiment, for example, which has been tested over and over again in psychology, if you had 10 people faced with the same situation about the parking spot, the exact same thing happens to 10 people.
Mhm.
Would you have the same reaction from the 10 people?
Pretty much. I would think it would be very similar. Well, some people don't care, but pretty much, it's pretty much, I'd
Some
say
people don't
probably,
care.
yeah, some people don't get it. Okay. Okay, I'll get the next one. But I'd say 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 for sure are gonna have Similar
So,
reactions.
well, and this is where we really get caught, because in the experiment, what's been like shown is that you'd have a person that might start crying in their car. Oh, it's
Yeah.
hopeless, whatever. You might have another
Yeah.
person that gets out of the car and starts yelling.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
You took it.
Those are radically different responses. You might even have a
Yeah.
person who's more centered and say, "Oh, okay, I guess that parking space was made met for them," like, and move
Yeah.
on, and there'd be
Yeah.
no emotion, right?
No. Yeah.
So in reality, I think what's hard for us to understand is that the reaction is not coming from what is happening. The
Mhm.
reaction is not coming from what my partner is saying or how the situation is unfolding. And
Mhm.
it's almost like, oh, it's a mind bender. Like, what do you mean? The guy took my parking space,
Yeah.
like, don't
Yeah.
even try to convince me. Okay, so the common denominator for all of us is that we stay attached to the thought that we're having, and
Mhm.
we stay attached at that level to have a discussion with our partner or have an exchange, that we stay with that thought. So in the example that you brought, right, like, let's take a
Mhm.
look at what is what is the woman thinking when she's saying it's not clean enough, and what
Mhm.
is the man thinking? So if you were to imagine that, what would you say? Give us a scenario. What's the
Well,
woman
he's
thinking?
she's thinking, "I worked hard all day. He gets to work at home. I don't have that luxury, and, at least if he has a more flexible schedule, he could take care of this, but now I'm coming home, I'm tired, and now I'm gonna have to do it because it wasn't done during the day, and what is he doing?"
Right. So you
Mhm.
can see, again, it's very similar to the parking space, where,
Yeah.
boy, is it easy to attach to that thought. It's just like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm right. Like, I worked my butt off today and I come out and the kitchen is not clean. It's like, hey, what's going on here? Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Very, very easy to attach to that thought. Now let's
Yeah.
imagine what could be a possible thought that he's having.
He's saying, "I'm home all day. I work hard. I have to balance working with getting everything in the household done. All this stuff comes up all day that I have to deal with, and I do the best that I can. But if you want it cleaner, hire a maid." I mean, he's kind of thinking the same thing she is. It's just a different, they have different responsibilities. So, and as somebody who works at home, I do have to say there is a perception out there that you are more free because you're working from home. So, um,
Fair.
people feel like, and there is some freedom to that, but at the same time, you also have the same responsibility. So you're trying to incorporate all of those responsibilities, and you don't necessarily have that. I mean, if you're in an office, there's nobody coming up, "Hey, can you do this right now?" That's from outside. Like, a family member doesn't come in and, saying,
I need
"Hey,
you
you wanna"
I need you to get in your car and go home and clean your kitchen and then come back and continue to do
Yeah,
your
yeah,
job.
come do that. So, I understand the struggle from both sides,
Yeah,
really,
yeah, absolutely. And
Mhm,
that's helpful, right? That's a
mhm,
beginning, so that we can actually see that if we stay on within a debate of,
yeah,
hey, see my point of view, and the other person says the same thing, it turns
yeah,
into immense friction, right?
mhm,
Because there's no meeting place in this.
yeah,
Because right, because one person's holding on really tight to their perception, and so is the other one. So when we try to communicate in this way, there is actually no communication,
yeah,
because you have two people who are trying in a way to convince the other person of their point of view.
right,
It's
right.
exhausting, right? It's really exhausting.
Or they feel like they're having to defend themselves in
Right,
it. Yeah,
right.
like
And so here's what we can do radically to stay and focus on the connection. So at the mental level, we're not focused on the connection. So we are feeling creatures, And as soon as there's a strong emotion that comes in the body, so the woman who walks home, in the moment that she says what she says about the kitchen not being clean or something, you can know that there's an emotion in her, right?
Right.
And then
Right.
as soon as her partner receives what she just said emotionally, then there's an emotion that happens in him,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So emotionally, we are not paying attention.
Mhm.
So we function because that's how it was growing up. We keep functioning on a analytical level. We're using words, right,
So
to communicate.
we're reacting, but we're not attuning.
Right. And it's radically different to attune to one's emotion. Now, here's the tricky part. That's another thing we know almost nothing about. And
Mhm.
here's the reason is because the people in our lives, when we look at how they deal with their emotions, they are being reactive to their emotions. That's what they do.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so when the person comes home and immediately there's frustration that it's not cleaned up,
Yeah.
then if you notice, the frustration is what gets acted out. And what is the frustration about? It's about the other person, it's about the situation. And so
Mhm.
now the person who receives that does the same thing. So now they receive this frustration at them, and then they do the same thing. They flip it back to the other person and says, "See, now I'm feeling hurt or angry." And it's
It's like a
because you
it's like a game of catch.
right.
Your turn. And then every once in a while it becomes a volleyball and just
Right.
wham.
Right. And when you
Yeah.
really wake up, you realize that it's a hot potato that's burning your hand, you know,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
in reality, this back and forth is a false attempt to belong, basically. Our
Mhm.
emotions are the most beautiful system of intelligence that is tracking our belonging. It's amazing.
Mhm.
It's such a beautiful tool, but yet
Mhm.
no one has taught us how to use that tool. We just react and we use more of there's thoughts that are associated with reacting, right? Like,
Mhm.
it's not fair. I work hard, but then you didn't work as hard as I did because the kitchen's not clean. The other person
Yeah.
says you're so demanding, right? It's just like all of these thoughts are creating a lot of emotions, and they're all about the thinking. They're all about what we're generating in our mind. And
Mhm.
it seems so hard for most people to actually unhook from that thought just for
Mhm.
like 2 seconds, right? Like,
Mhm.
and that's the secret of creating a change in the relationship is that our emotions are a signal. And when we're having them, there's something to pay attention to. They are as soon, like for example, when the woman walks in and she sees the kitchen, okay, right
Mhm.
before she's about to speak the words out of her mouth, attuning is about noticing that there's a frustration there.
Mhm.
And this is where it almost seems impossible because that emotion seems to be attached to the thought that we're having, which
Mhm.
is it's not fair that I work hard all day and this kitchen is still dirty, right?
Mhm.
That's the thought. And we
Yeah.
don't know how to unhook from that thought.
Yeah. I also think for people that have grown up in certain situations, like when you're in a dynamic like that, and when you've historically taken the route of trying to um, fix it for them, there can be that can trigger that whole past too, because if the other person seems like they're not taking any ownership of it, and historically you'd be like, "Oh, okay, well then I'll take care of it," kind of thing, then that is then you're feeling like, "Well, I can't really just let this go in that way." Um, but I think people do that also without necessarily being aware that that's what they're doing. And so they're not just saying to their partner, listen, when you're doing this, it's making me feel like what I am, they're not really talking about it. So it's just all reactions versus reactions on it.
Right. And what you're pointing out is it can create so many dysfunctional ways of interacting. Like you're saying,
Yeah.
maybe one person will just feel really bad about themselves, and maybe they'll,
Hmm.
the guy could start cleaning the kitchen and apologizing. That could be a
Yeah.
behavior, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there could be all kinds of codependency where one person is more like sort of submissive than the other one, or and
Yeah.
vice versa, depending
Yeah.
on how on the topic or what the situation is.
Hmm.
Here's what we don't know is that inside of us there's this beautiful being that wants connection.
Hmm.
And is not ironic, like even in those moments
Hmm.
we actually want to, why are we with a partner? Is it
Hmm.
right? Is our
Hmm.
partner's not our secretary, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Our partner's not the maid. Right?
We've read stories about that happening.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
So in truth, it's like I noticed just this morning, I had a challenging situation
Mhm.
with um, a program that we're dealing with where we paid money into this program, right?
Mhm.
And there's a disagreement about because there was no contract written, there's a disagreement on the fee that should be paid for the last month, okay, of
Yeah.
this program.
Yeah.
And as I'm like trying to communicate through this, it very much stayed in that dynamic that we illustrated earlier, which is the person states their point of view, I state my point of view, and
Yeah.
then it butts head, and then it goes nowhere. It doesn't matter how I keep fleshing it out, the other person keeps fleshing out what they see, and it's just irritation and
Yeah.
frustration, and it can escalate to such a high degree. Now,
Yeah.
here's what, for me, what's happening is that now that I've learned to attune to my emotional body, in that moment, I sat down and I looked at my wife and I said, I'm really scared and I'm really feeling this hurt inside of
Mhm.
me. And then what came out was, it's weird, but I feel like I don't matter. Like,
Mhm.
how bizarre is that? It's just a financial situation that we have to make a decision about, and we have to sort of work
Mhm.
it out with the other party.
Yeah.
That's really what came up
Mhm.
inside, is this
Mhm.
deep sense of I don't matter. Like, and I can remember in my childhood how my mother just ingrained the belief that the world's out to get you. You
Yeah.
better, you better
Oh,
defend
I know.
yourself, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so many of
Yeah.
us grew up with that kind of attitude, right?
Yeah.
So anytime that it appears that I might be taken advantage of here or something like that, right?
Yeah.
But the root of all this is not the situation, is not the other person. It's really that through this process, I'm trying to figure out who I am and whether this
Yeah.
situation changes this dynamic of who am I really, right? And
Yeah.
am I still a valuable person, or am I just some dumb person who's being taken advantage of here, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I can't solve it
Mhm.
with that person or with the situation. I can't
Yeah.
solve it at that level because it doesn't exist there. And
I was
that's
gonna
what we're
I was gonna say that also because I remember, and I don't even remember what it was about, but I remember with my partner Rich, he something happened, and I don't. It was something about the household cleaning or the way he liked the dishes, done or whatever. And I remember after we talked about it for a while, there was something that he said, and it was basically that if like if he had mentioned it before and then it was still being done, that way, then he was questioning, okay, well, what does that mean for me? Does this person not love me because they're not, or do they not, like it's your value kind of as a person. And I thought that was I was like, oh, okay. Well, I hadn't thought about it, but I think almost everything is that, like what you were saying, like it all kind of boils down to that. Like, oh, if they know that I like this, but then they decided to do this instead. And again, I don't even remember what it was about really, but I just remembered him saying um and it made me think of things in a different way, because it really had nothing to do with whatever it was. It had to do with his
Right.
feeling like maybe he was getting ignored, or it wasn't important enough to do it that way. So
We fight
just
so much,
everything.
Carrie, with ourselves and with
Mhm.
reality. Because in the
Yeah.
example you just gave me, it's as simple as
Mhm.
saying the woman just feels like she doesn't matter. Because if she
Yeah.
mattered, he would have cleaned the kitchen. And that's
Yeah.
like, and the man, as soon as he's pointed out that the kitchen's not clean, then he feels like he's a
Yeah.
bad person, and he would be
Yeah.
a good person if that comment hadn't happened,
So they're both
and
fighting for their worth.
they're both fighting for their worth.
Yeah.
And that's the insanity of being a human caught in the realm of sort of like thinking, because the
Right.
thinking never gets to the emotional, and then leaves us in a ton and ton and ton of conflict. I'm amazed how fast we can resolve our emotional turmoil by simply stating that. In a fraction of a second, I can say to my partner, whoa, I'm really scared right now, and I feel like somehow I'm not enough. And
Mhm.
immediately, everything emotionally calms down.
Mhm.
Like, and my partner doesn't feel blame. She's looking at
Yeah.
me and going like, oh, I had no idea that's what was going on. It's like, well, me neither, until I named it. I
Well,
wasn't aware.
I think people struggle though, because you guys have been doing this kind of work for a long time. So these are processes that you've gone through. Not everybody is working with a partner that's going to respond in that way. They
Favorably,
they
yeah.
yeah, they're not going to necessarily be, well, tell me more about that. They'll just be like, well, knock it off. Like, we got stuff to do. so that's a challenge, I think, that people struggle with, because yeah, they don't necessarily have that
I think
same
what
kind of
they
thing.
struggle more though is the language. So meaning that,
Hmm.
like even earlier, I think there's a lot of unconscious beliefs that we're not realizing, that our words are constantly, even when we attempt to share what's happening emotionally, there'll be
Yeah.
some language that says, you make me feel this way. Well, think of that
Right.
language. If I say to you, I feel like you make me feel like I'm not enough. What's the
Yeah.
difference between saying that and, God, I got really scared and I just ran with a story that I thought I wasn't enough? What's the
Yeah.
difference between the two? Right?
Yeah. Well,
Well,
one is
one,
you're stating your personal experience,
right.
and that's like authenticity. Like, people like can everyone can just downplay how important that is in your day-to-day life, and that's a tuning and being authentic to what you are really feeling, because we talk ourselves out of, oh, I shouldn't feel that, or what will this mean, instead of, just as you said, just stating, I'm feeling this right now.
and,
Isn't that
and
funny? Why do we do that? We run circles around it.
it's crazy making. And it's
Yeah.
like, at, at the core, I really, as I've observed this dynamic for like 20 years of working with people, what I
Yeah.
actually see is that as soon as there's an emotion, there's a belief associated with that emotion, which is, I'm bad.
Hmm.
So I'm bad for having the emotion.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and that's completely, that's insanity, because we are
Yeah.
feeling creatures, and
Yeah.
you can't not have feelings. That's just part of being a human being, right?
Hmm.
So if you have the belief that somehow, oh, now I'm bad for having this feeling, and it's not even conscious, like
Right.
the woman that comes home and is frustrated and express frustration about the kitchen not being clean enough, in that moment, if you ask that woman, do you feel bad about being frustrated? They would probably
Mhm.
say, no, I don't feel bad, right? They would
Yeah.
just say, but in truth, right?
Mhm.
What they don't know is that they're acting out their frustration, and that
Yeah.
is not an authentic way of communicating. And that means that you're experiencing some kind of discomfort about your emotion. And that's why you're reacting and acting it out. When we are
Yeah.
secure within our emotions, which is something we know very little about because we weren't
Mhm.
raised in secure attachment, we were raised in a
Mhm.
correction way of attaching. And it's very
Yeah.
confusing because the emotion comes like, I remember, like, if you think of attachment when you grow up, the way attachment works is that the caregiver prioritizes the connection with you. That's how attachment works. But if there's constant correction that keep coming your way, then what the being starts doing is start associating their behavior with who they are. And then they go,
Mhm.
okay, well, I gotta anticipate that I'll be corrected somewhere. And
Mhm.
the correction actually means that I'm bad. And
Well, and
so,
you're attuning to someone else. What you've been trained to do is not to attune to your own emotions, but you're attuning to
so
somebody
true.
outside of yourself. And then there's
So
a
true.
disconnect that's formed because you're not used to attuning into
Right.
yourself. You're always looking for, what do I need to do in this situation to make it okay?
Yeah,
Whatever
exactly.
situation that you're in.
Right. And so
Yeah.
that means that our sense of self actually comes from prioritizing other people,
Right.
prioritizing what they're feeling or what they want from us,
Mhm.
or anticipating what is it that they want from me in order
Yeah.
for me to be okay.
Yeah.
How exhausting is that?
Yeah. So we're running
Right.
around doing that instead of being like, what am I feeling right now?
Yeah.
This is how I'm feeling.
Right. And
Yeah.
valuing that experience, validating it
Yeah.
without having any judgment or expectation that it should be any different. It's like
Yeah.
coming home and going, oh, I noticed the kitchen is dirty and I just felt this wave of anger. You see, there's no
Yeah.
blame in this. It's just I'm acknowledging stimulus, kitchen this way, me feeling this way. Let me take
Yeah.
a look, right? What's
Yeah.
happening? And it's just like underneath that is some form of, oh, it's weird. I'm associating this kitchen with not mattering. Like,
Yeah.
whoa. Now, if I expose that to my partner can actually meet me where I'm at because I'm not projecting anger at my partner, and I'm not creating a separation and conflict and then this dynamic that we grew up in, right? That
Mhm.
is about this constant, watching for how the other person is and trying to adapt to that. This is
Yeah.
completely the opposite of that.
Yeah.
There is no there's no blame and there's no attaching my emotion to you. It's like I see what's happening and then I acknowledge the feeling that comes up and then I see the story that I'm telling myself about
Mhm.
myself, and that is the story that makes me angry. It makes me suffer.
Well, how do
It's the
you
real
say that
story.
though? Because if someone came home and said, um, I saw these dishes and I felt angry, I would still think I was getting blamed. So so, like, I think the way that you're delivering it, I mean, I'd be like, "Oh, really?"
Isn't
Um,
that amazing? That's exactly how we are, like how much conditioning there is. It's like the person stating the fact can still be
yeah.
taken personally.
You're angry, that means I didn't do it, so now you're angry because I didn't do the dishes. That's
Right.
what, yeah.
I think it's a good point though, because it's initially, especially at the beginning when we're getting used to that,
Yeah,
is to be able to bring some reassurance to each other. Like being
yeah,
able to say, okay, look, honey, I came home and I'm just noticing that I'm having some frustration here. I need to regroup here for a second, so that I need to figure out what this is about. The
yeah,
assumption, right, has
yeah,
to be that I understand that this frustration cannot be about the kitchen. that
Yeah.
it cannot be about the external stimulus, the other person, the
Right.
situation. And that takes a little bit like of doing to build that muscle, because
Mhm.
we are raised in the opposite way to believe
Right.
that, right, what caused us to experience what we're experiencing is the situation. It's such a trap to believe
Mhm.
that, you
Well, and
know?
we always guess wrong. Like, I did that with my dad, who was very controlling, and, like, I could not guess correctly anyways. So, like, how like, what he was thinking or what he wanted, like, I don't know. I don't know what it was never right. So, like, when you're trying to, like, second guess all the time what's going on in somebody's head, well, how refreshing is it when somebody just freaking tells you, you know?
Right, right.
They just are saying it, and then you're like, "Oh, okay." That's
Well,
nice.
yeah, exactly. And it's calming to the nervous system.
Mhm.
Just naming the experience that's happening without blame, that is very
Yeah.
soothing. That's like the
Yeah.
beginning of soothing ourselves, because now we're no longer in conflict with what is. We're just going, oh, this just appeared in my body. So that's a
Mhm.
simple way of, one of the shortcut that I've been using for myself is noticing feeling story I tell myself, feeling
Mhm.
story I tell myself. And it's like a repeat, and it can happen. There's no quota on how many times that can happen. But those two, right? If I'm able to name the feeling and the story I tell myself, and I say it exactly that way,
Yeah.
like frustration story I tell myself is like, I don't matter somehow, right? So I
Yeah.
came home, the kitchen wasn't clean, and I felt irritated, and now it's like I'm running with that story that I don't matter, right?
Yeah.
And it's like being able to express to ourselves and to our partner, isn't that ironic that I'm attaching whether I matter or not, whether you clean the kitchen or not? Right? It's
Yeah.
like, right? It's like
Yeah.
those two don't match. Like if we were
Mhm.
in a court of law and we sat in front of a jury and we would say, is this law? Right? Like, meaning,
Mhm.
do we decide if a person matters or doesn't matter, whether a kitchen gets clean or not? Right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
as we hear it out loud, we see the absurdity of it, right? Nobody would
Yeah.
ever say, yeah, when the kitchen's clean, that means you matter. When it's dirty, it
Mhm.
means you don't matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's absurd, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but it feels personal when you're it does feel personal when you're in the middle of it, that's for sure.
It does. And I think another thing that's really worth paying attention to is that when we have emotions, we're not really treating them as our ally. We haven't learned that yet. So
Yeah.
what's creating a lot of the reaction is the fear of actually trusting the emotion,
Yeah.
trusting that we're okay if we're having an emotion, that we're
Yeah.
not bad for having an emotion. And we
Yeah.
got to train that muscle. We have to,
Yeah.
because if we don't do that, we will continue to be reactive, right?
Mhm.
So imagine just practicing that with your relationship with your partner. It's just like you
Yeah.
make an agreement when you're not reacting outside of that. You say, hey, the next time that we're reacting, let's make the agreement of just pausing for a second and just naming the emotion that's coming up. That's it.
Yeah.
Like, we don't have to associate with anything else. It's just like, oh, I noticed that it just flared up. Like I just got frustrated there. Oh,
Yeah.
you did? Yeah. Oh, okay. So now I can, like, if I hang there a little bit, there's
Mhm.
nothing personal about me in there. It's just your frustration. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. And now it's like, can we make room for that frustration? And
Mhm.
we have a choice when we begin to be at that pivotal place where we're noticing the emotion and then we're naming it, is
Mhm.
that we can either go inward or we can go outward. And
Mhm.
if we go outward, then we know exactly where it's going, because
Mhm.
we're going to start debating and arguing and all that. Because when we go outward, we believe that the source of this emotion is out there somewhere. It's either my
Yeah.
partner, it's the situation. But when we
Mhm.
go inward, it's like curiosity to go, what is going on inside of me,
Mm-hmm.
facing the dirty kitchen, and now I'm having frustration. What is basically we're looking for? What is the interpretation that I'm having about this situation,
Yeah.
right?
And for people who are coming from a background of, like I started out with, like being manipulated or, undermined or not really being listened to. Well, even if you are the one doing it and your partner is not doing that, I feel like as you're strengthening that within yourself, then it could be that you end up not being with that person if they're not like a player. It could be that you do. It could be, but at least you're coming from a point that you're becoming more and more authentic by expressing yourself, you know?
And that's a hard one, what you're pointing out
Mhm.
to, because I think one of the main reason that people do not take ownership of their emotional body and their
Mhm.
experience is because they'll think, well, yeah, but my partner's not doing it.
Yeah. We had that at the treatment center a lot.
Right,
People were actually a little afraid to deal with some of this stuff because they didn't see their loved ones following suit on it. So they saw that if they worked on it, they were going to lose them
right.
because that's not what they didn't see the partner being able to do that or
Well,
family member.
and that's how strong we can be attached to being dysfunctional in a way. Like, and that
Mhm.
all comes back to self worth, right?
Yeah.
Meaning, what I discover is that sometimes my partner wasn't open at all. And
Yeah.
yet, when I continue to open myself up, I come from the belief that it's actually not possible for the other person to not come your way. That's what I actually
Yeah.
believe. But
Yeah.
here's the
Yeah.
thing, you have to be rock solid within yourself to be
Yeah.
able to be vulnerable yourself, no matter what your partner is doing or not doing.
Yeah.
Eventually, though, it's kind of like the famous saying, just kill them with kindness, like
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
really is true in terms of when someone does not blame and
Mhm.
stays vulnerable, eventually the other person will break down and stop blaming. They just
And
will.
well, and even if that doesn't happen, like, you're not a fortune teller. Like, you can try to predict it, like, as much as you want. I mean, there could be some fortune tellers out there, so, but, generally speaking, you just can't, you know, can't do that. So even if, um that happens, at least, like I said, you're being like very connected in with yourself and being authentic. And kind of whatever happens because of that is kind of what needs to happen. Or, it really, I have a problem trying to predict what will happen in the future with pretty much anything that, I mean, you're thinking, okay, well, if I do this, well, then do that. And at some point you have to be like, okay, that I don't really have control over anything like that. I just have to
Right.
do what I have to
Well,
do, and it'll work out however it's supposed to work out, basically.
yeah. And I love what
Yeah.
you're saying here, because the truth is that if we want connection in our lives, we
Hmm.
first have to prioritize the connection to our own emotional body. And once we
Right.
master that, we
Hmm.
will create amazing connection with the people around us. And whether
Yeah.
the relationship ends up in the one that you're in now or not, it's
Yeah.
not really where the focus needs to be, right? The
Right.
focus needs to be on my own connection to my emotional body, developing that muscle, and
Hmm.
then, applying it to the relationship I'm in now, and then
Yeah.
seeing how that can make a huge difference.
Because all of those other things and thoughts that come in are just manifestations of fear in some way, like
Exactly.
your fears, and whether the fears are based on reality or not, that's to be, remains to be seen. But it's really, I try to remind myself that's really not my concern,
Right.
what's going to happen because of that.
Yeah,
And that's
totally.
like,
And it's so precious to know that intimate relationships are about building connection and learning how to do that. That's really
yeah,
when we can see that, because, and also understand that we didn't have good role models that showed us how to really connect,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So it can be an uphill battle from time to
Mhm.
time because we didn't have any role models. But it doesn't mean that
Yeah.
we can't learn it, that we can't
Right.
change. You
We're having
know?
to retrain our brains
Yeah,
and not
totally.
and emotions. Like, our
Yeah,
brains get in the way a lot.
yeah,
It can, at least. So, reuse our emotional muscle, I should say.
totally.
See, again, it goes to the brain.
Yeah. And I would say, I think what we can leave uh, the listener today with is that I really believe that it boils down to courage. So
Mhm.
within our
Yeah.
relationship,
Yeah.
anytime there is friction, I
Mhm.
would invite us to breathe
Mhm.
and be courageous in that moment. And instead of going outward and following the mind, pause and take as many of a deep breath as you can and start moving inward now, right?
Mhm.
And if that's just that dynamic, like I was mentioning earlier, it could be a game changer for people just to begin to name the emotion and separate it from what's happening and
Mhm.
just make room for that emotion. That's like step
Mhm.
one, right?
Yeah. It's a lot
And
easier to be brave and have that courage when you know yourself
right,
and you're tuned
of
in.
course. And
Yeah.
but we'll create safety as we keep
Yeah.
practicing this, right?
Yeah.
But dividing
Yeah.
it in small little chunks like this, it's really helpful. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good. I think we got that answered then. One more for the books.
yes, yes. All right, Gary, thank you
All
so
right.
much.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Avive Levy podcast. Click on the link in the description below to record one of the questions you may have that we'll answer on one of our future podcasts. Also, I'd like to invite you to be a guest so that we can support you in delving deeper in resolving some of the core issues that you might be dealing with. Don't forget to check out my link for my books, also our newsletter, online groups, and the weekend adventures that I offer. Again, it is extremely rewarding to be on this self-discovery journey with you and to actually get to experience a sense of true belonging.